There comes a point where you realize the connection you've been holding on to isn't love anymore, it's just attachment. It's the ghost of what used to be, lingering in your mind, keeping you tied to someone who's no longer there. You keep replaying old moments, checking if he still thinks of you, wondering if he ever cared as deeply as you did. But the truth is, every time you revisit that connection, you stop yourself from moving forward. You keep feeding something that's already dead. Erasing the connection isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about reclaiming your peace from something that no longer deserves your energy. It's about deciding that you don't need to hold on to memories that drain you, or feelings that no longer feed you. Because sometimes the connection that once made you feel alive is now the very thing keeping you stuck. You see, he might have been a part of your story, but he doesn't have to be the whole book. He doesn't deserve to live rent-free in your thoughts while you carry the emotional cost of remembering him. This is where your power begins, when you stop trying to understand why it ended and instead accept that it's over. When you stop seeking closure and start choosing peace. This isn't about revenge or indifference or pretending you don't care. It's about rising above the need to care. It's about saying, I'm done letting this connection define how I feel about myself. Because once you decide that his chapter has ended, you make space for something greater, your healing, your confidence, your freedom. That's when you truly erase him, not from memory, but from influence, not because you hate him, but because you finally love yourself more. You thought the connection you had with him was rare, that spark, that effortless pull, the way he seemed to understand you without needing words. It felt special because it was, but special doesn't always mean sustainable. Sometimes what feels like a once-in-a-lifetime connection is really just a powerful lesson wrapped in chemistry. It's easy to mistake intensity for destiny. You meet someone, and suddenly your world feels brighter. You start believing it's meant to be because it feels so strong. But not everything that burns brightly is meant to last. Some people enter your life to awaken something inside you, not to stay, but to show you what you deserve and what you should never accept again. When you start to see the connection for what it truly was, a lesson, not a lifelong bond, you begin to reclaim your power. Because the moment you stop romanticizing the pain, you start healing from it. The connection may have taught you patience, vulnerability, or even how deeply you're capable of loving. But once the lesson is learned, the attachment becomes unnecessary. You don't need to keep revisiting the same emotional place to prove that it mattered. It mattered, but it doesn't have to control you anymore. The truth is, the connection didn't fail. It fulfilled its purpose. It showed you who you are, what you value, and maybe even what you've outgrown. It exposed the parts of you that needed attention, the parts that settle, that chase, that confuse being seen with being loved. That's the beauty of painful connections. They reflect the gaps in our self-worth so that we can fill them ourselves. Once you understand that, you stop clinging to the person and start appreciating the growth. You stop asking, why didn't it last? And start saying, thank you for showing me what I needed to see. But that kind of acceptance doesn't come easily, because when you've invested your emotions, your time, your hope, walking away feels like erasing part of yourself. You keep replaying the good moments, hoping they'll justify holding on. Yet the more you hold on, the more you keep yourself trapped in a story that's already ended. There's no freedom in living in reruns of what used to be. The truth is, you can honor the connection without keeping it alive. You can acknowledge that it mattered and still let it go, because what once helped you grow can now hold you back if you refuse to release it. You erase the connection not by denying its existence, but by detaching from its emotional grip, by accepting that it served its purpose. The lesson was never about keeping him, it was about keeping what you learned from him. The compassion, the awareness, the strength, those are yours to keep. He was just the messenger, and once the message is clear, you don't need to keep rereading it. Sometimes the universe sends people to shake us awake, to make us confront our patterns, to test how much we're willing to give up before we realize we deserve better. And once that realization hits, the connection that once felt irreplaceable starts to lose its power. Because what you truly wanted wasn't him. It was the feeling of being understood, being chosen, being safe. And when you start giving those things to yourself, you no longer crave them from someone else. So yes, the connection was real. It was intense, it meant something, but not everything that means something is meant to remain. You don't have to erase the memory, just the emotional weight it carries. You can carry the wisdom forward and leave the rest behind, because when you let go of what was, you create space for what's next, a connection that doesn't confuse your peace with your pain. Emotional detachment isn't about shutting down or pretending you don't care. It's about learning how to care in a way that doesn't destroy your peace. When you erase a connection, it's not about deleting someone from your life out of anger, but about removing their influence over your emotions. You can still acknowledge that they existed, that you shared moments, that they mattered, but you no longer allow their choices, their moods, or their absence to dictate how you feel about yourself. Detachment is not coldness, it's control. It's deciding that your emotional stability will no longer depend on someone who couldn't handle the weight of your heart. When you're emotionally attached to someone who has already let go, you end up fighting battles that only exist in your mind. You reread messages, you look for signs, you replay conversations, all in an attempt to keep the emotional thread alive. But attachment without reciprocation is self-inflicted suffering. You keep giving energy to something that's no longer giving back. The more you invest in it, the smaller you feel, because you start believing that your value depends on whether they come back or not. Detachment is the moment you take that power back. It's when you stop waiting for closure, stop chasing explanations, and stop letting your emotions be a reaction to theirs. There's incredible freedom in realizing you don't need their validation to heal. You don't need to prove that you were worthy of love. You already are. Emotional detachment means you can think about them without collapsing, remember them without longing, and see their name without your stomach turning. It's not that you've become numb, it's that you've built emotional distance strong enough to protect your peace. That distance doesn't come from hate, it comes from clarity. You finally understand that no one should have that much power over your happiness. The truth is, emotional detachment is not something that happens overnight. It's a daily choice. Every time you resist the urge to check their profile, you detach a little. Every time you choose to respond to your pain with patience instead of reaction, you detach a little. Every time you catch yourself romanticizing the past, and instead remind yourself of the truth, that the connection is over, you detach a little more. Slowly, the emotional cord weakens, the waves of sadness come less frequently, and your peace starts to feel more natural than your pain. Detachment also means letting go of the fantasy. You stop holding on to the idea of who they could be and start accepting who they are, or who they've already shown themselves to be. You stop rewriting the story in your mind where they finally come back and make things right, because the reality is, the version of them you loved may never return, and that's okay. You can love someone deeply and still accept that they're not meant to stay. You can wish them well and still walk away. That's not weakness, that's emotional maturity, and the more detached you become, the stronger you feel. You start noticing that you have more energy for yourself, for your goals, your passions, your friends. The thoughts that used to drain you start to fade into the background. Their absence no longer feels like a void. It feels like space, space for peace, space for joy, space for something new. You realize that emotional detachment doesn't erase love, it transforms it. It takes it from obsession to understanding, from control to release, from chaos to calm. One day you'll look back and realize that detachment was the kindest thing you ever did for yourself. Because it gave you back your freedom, the freedom to feel without fear, to care without losing yourself, to love without needing to suffer. And that's when you'll know the connection has truly been erased, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. Cutting off communication is one of the hardest yet most powerful steps in erasing a connection that no longer serves you. It's the point where your healing truly begins, because silence becomes your statement. When you stop responding, when you stop checking, when you stop feeding the connection with your attention, you create space for clarity to return. Communication is energy. Every text, every reply, every moment you give to thinking maybe I should reach out is another thread keeping you tied to something that's already breaking. The moment you stop talking to him, you're not just ending a conversation, you're declaring that you are no longer available for inconsistency, half-effort, or emotional confusion. We often underestimate how much power there is in silence. You think that by staying quiet, you're losing control of the narrative, that he'll forget you, or worse, that he'll assume you didn't care. But that's the ego talking, the part of you that still craves a reaction, still wants proof that he feels your absence. True strength is in not needing that proof, because when you stop explaining, stop defending, and stop trying to make someone see your worth, you start reclaiming it for yourself. Every time you choose silence over reaction, you're telling the universe, I don't chase what's not choosing me. Silence creates discomfort, not just for him, but for you too. It feels unnatural at first, because your heart still wants to reach out, still wants to check in, still wants closure. But closure doesn't come from words, it comes from acceptance. When you stop communicating, you stop giving him the opportunity to confuse you with mixed signals. You stop allowing his words to pull you back into a story that's already ended, and that's when healing can finally breathe. Because you can't move forward when your mind is still replaying old conversations, waiting for new ones that only bring you more pain. Cutting off communication also exposes his true intentions. The man who genuinely cares will notice your silence, not because you're playing a game, but because he feels the loss of your energy. But a man who was only benefiting from your attention will quietly fade away, because it was never you he valued, it was your availability. Either way, your silence reveals the truth, and the truth is the closure you were searching for. There's a calm that comes after the chaos of communication ends. You start realizing how much mental space he occupied. You begin to see how often you would wait for a message that didn't come, or how much you adjusted your emotions based on his replies. That's not love, that's dependency, and silence breaks that pattern. It rewires your mind to stop expecting, stop waiting, and start living again. It gives you back your mornings, your focus, your peace. It teaches you to fill the quiet with something better with yourself. The most beautiful part of cutting off communication is that it shifts the power dynamic back to you. Not in a manipulative way, but in an empowering one, because the moment you stop engaging, you stop being a participant in your own pain. You stop letting him decide when you feel valued and when you don't. Your silence becomes a boundary, one that says, I will no longer allow you access to the parts of me you took for granted. And over time, what once felt like restraint starts to feel like freedom. So don't fear silence, embrace it. Let it speak for you, let it show him what your presence truly meant. Let it remind you that peace doesn't need validation and dignity doesn't demand attention. Because in the quiet, you'll find yourself again stronger, calmer, and completely untouchable. That's the power of cutting off communication. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. When you begin to erase a connection, the most crucial shift happens not on the outside, but within your emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your peace, your self-worth, and your energy. They determine what you allow, what you tolerate, and what you walk away from. When those boundaries are weak, you become vulnerable to emotional manipulation, guilt, and confusion, especially from someone who once knew how to reach you. Strengthening them means you no longer let your emotions be dictated by someone else's actions or attention. It means learning to say, I can feel deeply, but I won't lose myself in the process. For many people, emotional boundaries blur when they're attached. You tell yourself you're just being compassionate, understanding, or forgiving, but often it's self-abandonment disguised as love. You excuse behavior that hurts you because you hope it'll change. You keep giving chances because you remember the good moments. You overextend emotionally even when the other person barely meets you halfway. And that's the trap. Every time you make excuses for disrespect, every time you sacrifice your peace to keep a connection alive, you teach the other person how to treat you. That's why emotional boundaries aren't just about protecting yourself from others. They're about teaching yourself how to value your own peace above your attachment. When you start enforcing boundaries, it's uncomfortable. The person you're detaching from might accuse you of being cold, distant, or dramatic. They might try to guilt you into softening again because they were used to the version of you who always said yes, who always understood, who always stayed no matter what. But holding your boundaries isn't about proving a point to them, it's about proving something to yourself. You're proving that you can love someone and still choose yourself. You're proving that your empathy doesn't require your self-sacrifice. And most importantly, you're proving that you can feel pain without letting it control your decisions. Strong boundaries don't mean building walls, they mean having gates. You decide who gets access to you and under what conditions. If someone constantly crosses those boundaries, it's not your job to keep explaining why it hurts. It's your job to walk away. When you begin to prioritize your peace, you stop negotiating with people who thrive on chaos. You stop trying to get validation from someone who benefits from keeping you uncertain. And you start realizing that peace is not earned through someone's approval. It's maintained by your refusal to let them disrupt it. Creating and maintaining emotional boundaries is also about becoming aware of your triggers. What words make you feel guilty? What gestures make you want to fix things again, even when you shouldn't? When you understand those patterns, you take back your emotional power. You begin to respond with clarity instead of reaction. You no longer let someone's inconsistency dictate your emotions, because you've learned to find stability within yourself. That's where your real strength lies, in being able to feel the pull to go back, but choosing your peace instead. Eventually, your boundaries become your filter for love. You stop attracting chaos because you no longer resonate with it. You stop entertaining half-hearted connections because your soul now recognizes them as distractions. And the people who truly deserve you will respect your limits, not test them. They'll admire your calm instead of mistaking it for distance. Because the truth is, the more solid your emotional boundaries become, the less you crave validation from anyone. You realize that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's sacred. So, as you erase that connection, remember this. You're not building emotional walls to keep love out. You're building emotional strength to let the right kind of love in. The kind that doesn't require you to shrink, chase, or compromise your worth. Boundaries are the bridge between your past self, who tolerated too much, and your future self, who finally understands her value. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as letting someone off the hook, but in truth, it's about setting yourself free. When you choose to forgive, you're not saying what they did was acceptable. You're saying it no longer deserves to occupy space in your mind or your heart. The weight of resentment keeps you tied to the very person you're trying to erase. Every time you replay what happened, every time you think of what you should have said or how they should have treated you, you're keeping the connection alive. Forgiveness is the act of cutting that final thread, not because they earned it, but because you deserve peace. Holding on to anger feels powerful in the beginning. It gives you a sense of control when everything else feels uncertain. You tell yourself, "I'll never forgive him for that," as if that anger is your armor. But over time you realize that armor gets heavy. It starts to harden your heart, not protect it. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's emotional maturity. It's looking at the pain and saying, "You no longer define me." Because when you don't forgive, you keep the past alive, and as long as it's alive, it continues to shape your present. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without resentment. It means acknowledging that you've learned something, that you've grown, that you're stronger now. When you truly forgive, you release yourself from the loop of emotional replays, the what-ifs, the if-onlys, the how could he. You stop waiting for him to feel the same regret or guilt that you do. You stop expecting an apology that may never come. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for you. It's reclaiming your energy from the story that broke you and choosing to write a new one. The hardest part of forgiveness is that it requires vulnerability. You have to face the hurt instead of hiding from it. You have to admit that you cared, that you were disappointed, that you were let down, but when you face it fully, you strip it of its power. Pain can't control you when you've looked it in the eye and said, "I'm done letting you lead me." That's the quiet power of forgiveness. It transforms pain into wisdom. It turns what could have been bitterness into depth, compassion, and self-awareness. When you forgive, you also change the way you see the relationship. You stop seeing it as a failure and start seeing it as a lesson. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start realizing it happened for me. Maybe it taught you what self-respect truly means. Maybe it showed you what red flags you'll never ignore again. Maybe it revealed the parts of you that needed healing long before he came into your life. Either way, forgiveness helps you extract the growth from the pain instead of carrying the pain itself. Forgiveness also takes away his power over you, because as long as you're angry, he still has control, not through his actions, but through your emotions. Every time you think of him with resentment, you're giving him more time, more space, more energy. But when you forgive, that energy comes back to you. Suddenly, you're lighter. You can think of the past without tension in your chest. You can hear his name without your stomach twisting. You can look back without wanting to go back. That's freedom, and here's the truth. Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. Some days you'll feel peace, other days the pain will resurface. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. But every time you choose peace over anger, every time you remind yourself that you deserve to move on, you're forgiving a little more. Eventually, you'll realize that the act of forgiving wasn't about him at all. It was about you reclaiming your power. Because real freedom isn't forgetting what happened. It's no longer being controlled by it. When you finally erase the connection and step into a new chapter, what comes next isn't about proving a point. It's about rebuilding yourself from a place of peace, not pain. Moving forward isn't just about living without him. It's about rediscovering who you are without the noise, the waiting, and the emotional chaos that came with the relationship. It's about remembering that your story doesn't end with heartbreak. It begins with clarity. The moment you stop chasing closure, explanations, or another chance, you start to create space for something far more meaningful, your own evolution. Moving forward after erasing someone means falling in love with your own life again. For so long, your energy revolved around what he thought, how he felt, or whether he cared. Your emotions were tied to his actions, but now your focus shifts inward. You start to rebuild your identity outside of the relationship, not as someone's other half, but as a complete person who has dreams, passions, and purpose that existed long before he did. You begin to realize that the love you gave him so freely wasn't wasted. It was proof of your capacity to care deeply. And now that same love can be redirected into yourself and your future. The first step in moving forward is accepting the silence. You'll have moments where the past calls you back, an old memory, a song, or a message you never deleted. It's tempting to revisit what's familiar, even if it hurt you, because healing often feels lonely. But growth only happens when you resist that pull and stay committed to what's best for your peace. The silence that once felt unbearable eventually becomes comforting, because it means you're no longer tied to confusion or disappointment. It's a reminder that your life doesn't need noise to have meaning. Rebuilding after erasing someone also requires self-compassion. You'll look back and wonder why you stayed as long as you did, why you ignored red flags, or why you gave more than you received. But healing isn't about judgment, it's about understanding. You stayed because you hoped, you cared because you felt deeply. You forgave because you believed in potential. None of those things make you weak, they make you human. The key is to take those lessons and use them to build stronger boundaries, deeper self-awareness, and higher standards for what love should look like. As you move forward, you'll notice something powerful. Peace starts to feel addictive. The calm that once felt strange becomes your new normal. You no longer crave the highs and lows of a roller coaster connection. You start to appreciate quiet mornings, your own company, and the freedom of not wondering what someone else is doing. You start making decisions based on what's right for you, not what will make someone else stay. That's when you realize you've truly let go, when your peace matters more than your past. Eventually, moving forward becomes less about him and more about you stepping into your highest self. You attract differently because you are different. You no longer chase people who can't meet you halfway. You stop confusing attachment for love, and you start recognizing that the relationship was never meant to define your worth. It was meant to reveal it. The version of you that emerges after heartbreak is wiser, calmer, and more intentional. You know what you deserve, and you're no longer afraid to walk away from anything that threatens your peace again. So, moving forward isn't about pretending it never hurt. It's about allowing that hurt to shape you into someone stronger. It's about realizing that erasing him wasn't the end, it was the beginning of your freedom. And the more you embrace that freedom, the more you understand that love will return to you, not through chasing what's gone, but by becoming the kind of person who no longer settles for less than she deserves, because real healing isn't about forgetting the past, it's about no longer living in it. At the end of it all, erasing the connection isn't about revenge, indifference, or pretending he never existed. It's about peace. It's about finally stepping out of the emotional loop where your worth was tied to his attention. It's about realizing that healing doesn't happen when you get closure from him. It happens when you give closure to yourself. You don't need to prove that you've moved on. You don't need to show him what he lost. The real power is in walking away quietly, healing deeply, and never needing to look back. Because the truth is, the strongest thing you'll ever do is choose yourself after someone made you forget how to. To look in the mirror and say, I deserve peace, I deserve presence, I deserve love that feels safe. And the moment you decide that, you begin to attract a life that reflects it. You'll notice how the world starts to shift when you stop giving energy to what drains you. You'll find calm where there used to be chaos. You'll find joy in your solitude, and you'll realize he was never the loss. Losing yourself was. Erasing him is not about erasing love, it's about reclaiming it. It's taking all the energy you once poured into trying to make something work and redirecting it into building the life you deserve. It's about walking forward lighter, freer, and more grounded in your worth. And maybe one day he'll think of you not with bitterness, but with the quiet realization that you were the one who got away. But by then you'll already be too far ahead to care. So don't erase him to hurt him. Erase him to heal you. Erase him because your story deserves new chapters, ones filled with peace, power, and purpose. Because the moment you stop trying to rewrite the past, you start writing the future you were always meant to live.